that introduction, Elizabeth, and thanks everybody for joining tonight. I'm going to just jump right in and start showing you some pictures about what we're going to talk tonight, drip and micro irrigation. And as Elizabeth said, I do manage the Eggert Family Organic Farm at WSU. It's a 10-acre teaching farm, and we specialize mostly in vegetables, but also tree fruit. And we use these irrigation systems for really all of our cropping that we do, and I've used it at home. I've been using, drip irrigation probably since the late 90s when I started getting into organic ag. So I've been around a long time. It's kind of a love-hate relationship, and I'll explain what I mean by that. It's got some great benefits, but it's something that you have to kind of trial and error and learn how to use with time. So save your questions for the end, put them in the chat, and we'll try to save some time to get to those. I know this topic will bring up lots of questions for everybody, but just take a look at some of these pictures here to get you started. This upper left one is a young crop of potatoes, and you can see there's some main line across here, but all these rows are young potatoes coming up, and you can't see any irrigation in there because I have it buried. So this is one of the cool features I wanted to show in this picture, that drip irrigation can be buried. And in this situation, potatoes work great because we're hilling those potatoes as we grow them. Down here in the right-hand side, you can see drip tape, and it really literally is a flat tape. It acts as a hose when it has water in it, but it lays flat. And in this field, lots of different crops side by side. So I know that's one of the questions, is how do you manage multiple crops in the same area? But look at this. I've got beets, kale. I've got a new bed of something that maybe is carrots, for example. Here's more mature carrots. There's more beets. There's cabbages. There's lettuce in this field. And they're all managed really similarly. All these beds typically in this section of field would have 4 lines of drip tape corresponding 1 row for each line of tape. And then this is just kind of a bigger picture of sort of what the farm looks like, Moscow Mountain in the background. We're located in the Palouse, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about what our soil profiles look like. Here's some more pictures. So sort of up close pictures with some mature carrots and beets in that same field that we were looking at before. This is what our soil looks like. We have a really beautiful sandy, well, it's silty loam actually, soil that we don't have any rocks. It does great with drip irrigation. This crew here is planting garlic in that picture. Okay, so tonight what I really want to talk about is drip tape, overhead sprinklers, how do we water trees and shrubs, and then raised beds and container plantings. So I'm going to do that by showing you some pictures. I'm going to show you some diagrams. I'm going to kind of talk you through the planning steps that I think are really important to think about when you're considering this. And just looking at the chats when people were coming on, I see, there's a lot of people that are already using this, some that haven't. So, if you've used these systems before, hopefully you can pick up something new. And if you haven't used this, hopefully we can get you started in the right direction. So these pictures over on the left side are both in our hoop houses. These are our high tunnels. It's just a plastic covered structure where we grow crops year round. And in this upper one, there's some sprinklers there, and that's how that area is being watered. In the lower picture, drip tape again. So in these houses, we have the opportunity to use both kinds of systems, and it kind of has, we'll come back to this and I'll talk a little bit more specifically about hoop house management. Okay, so some concerns and benefits from using these types of systems. Well, 70% of all fresh water in our world is used for irrigation. Isn't that amazing? That figure just blows me away, and it really drives home the importance of thinking about conserving water and developing irrigation systems that do the best job that we can do when we're going to use water in irrigation settings. So Drip systems really came about in the 60s, 1960s, and Israel was really the place where our modern drip systems were born. There's been irrigation for millennia, right? Folks have been using irrigation that dates back to the beginning of agriculture, but using this modern technology really was developed in arid climates in the Middle East. And they were meant to run on low pressure. So this is one of the key things that you've got to really realize, especially with drip tape, with the drip emitters. They all want to be on low pressure, and that just naturally creates a system that uses less water. We're not running as much flow through our systems at those lower pressures. Sprinkler systems tend to run on a little higher, but for most of the drip, we're going to be talking about low pressure systems. Okay, and really conserving water is the name of the game, like I've already said. Putting the water right where you want to grow crops is essential. And one of the key benefits is that you're not going to develop as many weeds in your garden or your farm. If you're watering exactly where your crops are, you're not going to be watering pathways, you're not going to be watering extra areas that those weeds are going to have a chance to grow. So here on the Palouse, we have a lot of natural rainfall in the winter. We have great moisture in the spring, but as it dries off in the summer, and we really are relying on that drip irrigation, we see a huge benefit in just less weeds that we have to deal with in our systems. These drip irrigations can be adapted to gardens, small containers, row crops, all kinds of different systems can be used for these. And it's almost exclusively used in vineyards. Vineyards are kind of notorious for being really stingy on water use. And so drip is like the perfect system for that. A lot of orchards have either been transitioned to drip or are installed with drip now because they work really well. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. And then a couple other things. Watering from drip encourages deeper root systems. So I know a lot of us have kind of grown up hand watering and maybe still water things by hand, and that's, feels good. We can see that. But what we're essentially doing is just watering the very top of the surface. It's so hard when you're hand watering to really get a good feel for how deep that water needs to be going. And if it's not going deep, you're not encouraging your root systems to grow deep. And that's one of the other big takeaways. I want everybody to really kind of come away with, if I can grow a healthier plant by growing deeper roots, you're going to do a better job with your crops, no matter what. And you can connect these to timers, automation devices. I don't do a lot of that, but I do touch on it in this presentation. So I'll give you a little bit more information about how that works. Okay, we got to talk about soil types here. On this left part of the slide, I've got some different examples. Now, soil texture is made up of sand, silts, and clays. Okay, those are the only three things that make up soil. So depending on where you are, you're going to have one of three of these types of soils. Okay, you could have sandy soil, and typically, so imagine this black line across this slide is a drip line, and those white things are emitters. And so water is coming down out of that emitter slowly. So drip irrigation doesn't happen fast. It's a slow system. As that water comes down, in sandy soil, there's a lot of particle spaces between the sand. That allows the water to essentially go deeper rather than farther to the sides. As you go towards the other end of clay, silty soils, the water tends to go slowly side to side until it kind of reaches a maximum width, and then the gravitational force on that water pulls it farther down. So on the Palouse, we're really blessed with those silty loams. And that middle picture really pictures what is going on under the soil underneath a drip system. So that's an important visual to think about. Okay, now on the other side of this slide, you've got to think about your water source. So when you're going to connect a system, you have to identify, are you going to use city water? Are you going to be using a well, a cistern, pond, or stream? And that's going to really determine kind of a couple key elements to how you build your system. So identifying that, if you don't know yet, is really important. And then a couple other key things down here I want to show you. The point of connection, or POC. This is where you're going to actually connect that tubing to. And so for most of us in this talk, we're going to be talking about water spigots, where like you would connect your hose to in your garden. The next option, if you're going to be going into a bigger farm scale, you might have a ball valve, something bigger than a hose spigot, but that's the point of connection, okay? And then pressure. At each of these points of a connection, there will be a certain amount of pressure to your water. If you don't know what that is, you can get some help and figure out. Putting a meter on there will tell you. Somebody else might know in your area. Most of our home water systems, just if we have a spigot coming out of our house, they're roughly going to be around 45 psi. You might experience higher water pressure like I do at Eggert Farm because I'm on a WSU system. It's more like a municipal system, and I've got a lot of water at higher pressure, but you need to know what that is. You want to know what your flow rate is in gallons per hour, and there's sources, I'm going to show you how to find these, that'll help you determine that. So essentially, how much water can I move through my system at a given rate? That's important. And then the area to water. What is it you're going to be watering? Is it your garden? Is it your orchard? You want to have some dimensions figured out. So that's going to show you how much drip tape, emitter line, however, whatever it is, how much you're going to need. Okay, so those are really important to have figured out. Now this next page, these are gonna you're going to get these at the end of the presentation. Our hosts are going to share this presentation with you, so you'll be able to go back and reference these. But I want to show you some places where you can buy drip tape and find other resources and guides on how to use this. I'm happy to share what I have, but a lot of what I figured out is through doing my own research with these kinds of companies. And there's so much out there on the web that will help you come back and use these as a reference. So this first one, Drip Depot, this is a big guide that you can open up, and you can go in there and you'll see all the terminology, tons of information. Same thing on the DripWorks one, the drip planning guide. And these you can find at their websites as well. And those two companies are ones that I primarily use to buy my parts and pieces. Drip tape, I buy almost exclusively from Drip Depot. And then DripWorks, I buy a lot of my parts and pieces and the connecting pieces. I'll show you what those look like. These other sources are just kind of some other ideas. Rainbird parts are really common at hardware stores. So the first two things, you really can't find those locally. I have to mail order pretty much everything I want. At hardware stores, the Rainbird systems tend to be more available, and they don't really have exactly what I like. Some of their components are okay, but I just wanted to put it out there that those do exist, but I want to show you some other ones. And then these last two on this list, Berry Hill Drip and Trickley's, are more geared towards farm scale. So if you're looking at scaling up, you're looking at kind of what do row cover, row crop farm, what do those folks kind of do? Those types of sites will be more appropriate. So let's just take a second. I'm going to jump over and show you what DripWorks irrigation website looks like. Okay, so, you know, many of you have already wondered, like, where am I going to buy this stuff? So here you go. Across the top, you can see drip irrigation, yard garden, greenhouses. There's tons of information. And when you get into these explore sites, there's that resource. So when you go to that resource section, you'll see the guide, like I'm going to, you know, leave up on the page for you to go back and look at on your own time. But those are places to look. And then let's just kind of open up this drip irrigation one and see what they have. So there's lots of kits. This is really cool to see. Both of these companies offer kits, and that's what the Conservation District is offering to folks tonight. But there's great starter kits. If you're new to this, these are really easy to buy. You can add on to them. But if you're new to the whole thing, these are sometimes really easy systems to start with. So you can I just need to get something in front of me in my garden and start playing with it. That's a good way to go. So, okay, those are two websites that I really recommend. And see if we can get my presentation back up. Okay, cool. All right, now some more nitty-gritty. Now this next slide, on the right, let's start with this. So on the right are different examples of drip lines and drip tapes. So I do want to say this is different than a soaker hose, and many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with soaker hoses, and that's one of the products that are really readily available at local hardware stores. I'm not a big fan. They're out there, they exist, they work really similarly to some of these products, but I tend to see them fail pretty regularly. They don't hold up as well, they don't have good longevity, and they don't water effectively as these other systems do. So I'm not ruling it out. I just want to show you these alternatives, okay? So first off, 1/4-inch soaker drip line. Now that's really small diameter. If you look on the left here, that's how big a 1/4-inch line is if you were cross-section looking at that, okay? And that line will have emitters, basically points along that line that allow water to come out. And you can purchase that with emitters at different spacings, 6-inch, 9-inch, kind of depends on the company and the product. But that is kind of the perfect thing to use for container gardenings, for raised beds, kind of smaller applications, okay? Now the next one here is the 1/2-inch inline emitter tubing. This one works the same way, but it's a little bigger. You're going to be able to move more water through that. And again, you can get these with different spacings for the emitters. The cool thing about the 1/2-inch emitter line is that it could go uphill, it can go downhill, it's pressure compensating. And that's different from both the soaker 1/4-inch line and the drip tape. Those are not pressure compensating. They don't work that well if you're trying to go up and down, but that 1/2-inch one is a cool solution if you've got some topography that you're dealing with, you're going up a hill or down a hill, okay? And then that last picture there is drip tape. That's the one that's flat when it's empty, but it fills and makes a tube. And again, it has different spacing depending on what you do. For vegetables, I recommend the 8-inch spacing. That's all I use. I only buy drip tape at 8-inch spacings. It works great for our soils. It's the most uniform. When you are looking at drip tape online and mail ordering this, okay, what do I want to get? You're going to see some different options based on thickness. It comes in 6 mil, 8 mil, 10 mil, even up to 15 millimeters. So that's the thickness of the plastic used in the tubing. The thicker the material, it's going to cost you more, but it's going to be heavier duty and it potentially will last longer. So all these systems you can reuse year after year. One of the keys is if you buy a little higher grade product, it's going to last long if you want to use it in that way, okay? So examples on the left here are all the different poly lines. These are the delivery lines. What we use, I call main lines. So I got to move water to my drip or my emitters, but I got to get it there in a line that doesn't have holes in it, right? So I use 1-inch, 3/4, 1/2-inch. For smaller gardens, you're primarily going to be dealing with 1/2-inch. That's usually fine. But as you get into bigger spaces and bigger lengths, you need to go up in size. And that chart at the bottom will help you give you an idea of like, how long can I make a run of this and how much water does that even hold? Okay, parts and pieces. This is the part of the presentation I wish I could see you all and have you at the farm, and hopefully, you know, those of you that can come to our tour in July will be able to take a look at these pieces and have you handle the drip tape and things. But I'm going to do my best to explain these in the pictures, so just bear with me. I'll see if I can get my cursor to cooperate with me. Here it is. There we go. All right, so on the left there, this is called a T, and these are fittings that connect that main line, that poly line. So again, these come in the same sizes that those do. This one is a 1-inch piece, but they also come in 3/4 and 1/2-inch sizes. So the cool thing about all these fittings is that this is an easy lock system, meaning that there's a part right here that spins. There's no other connections. You push the main line onto this barb part and you tighten that fitting to the main line, and it's really easy to use that way. There's no other clamps or pieces, there's no glue. This is something that I think everybody can kind of get their head wrapped around, and it really simplifies the whole process. So you can see that on every one of these. This is a valve. That green part spins and that opens and closes that piece, so it creates a valve. But again, you have a, if you imagine like a line on either side of that going in the direction that you're moving your water. Down here on the left is a coupler, so if you want to join two pieces, you can do that. Here's an elbow. If you need to turn a corner, make a 90-degree change of direction, that's the piece for you. And then this one is an end cap. So this is how you finish a line. And again, these exist in all those different sizes. The T is really great for adding kind of a change in direction or adding a zone, and we'll talk more about how that works. Okay, now over on the right side, here's more hand tools. So this orange handled thing, well, that looks like a trowel. Yeah, it's a trowel. It's called a hori-hori. It's a Japanese digging tool, and I always keep this with me. All these tools on this page live in an irrigation toolbox that I take everywhere I'm going to work on irrigation. And I have a 10-acre farm. I'm on a four-wheeler. I want to have these parts and pieces with me all the time. So my toolbox has extras of all those valves and couplers, plus all these hand tools. So I'm not going back and forth between my barn or my workshop to get all these things. I work on irrigation every single day, and believe me, it's nice to have a toolkit with you that goes with you. So that trowel, I thought I'd throw it in there because it's a nice way to have a tool that you can just, how is my water doing? How deep is my water going? You can use that really quickly and kind of do a sample in your garden bed to get down below the surface. You can't believe what you see on the surface. It may look wet, but you could go down an inch and it would be dry, and you don't know it unless you look. So this is part of really learning how well you're watering. You got to know, you got to put your hand in there, you got to put a tool in there and really see what the water's doing. Okay, next to that is a pair of channel locks, and that is a handy tool to have, both for tightening things. If you're having trouble with those easy lock fittings, sometimes that's helpful to get on and off. Next to that is a pair of cutters. All that polyline, it's really easy to cut with a pair. This is just a pair of pruners. It's a cheap hardware store pair that we just keep in the box. That's really handy for that 3/4, half-inch, 1-inch line. The pair of scissors, that's what I use to cut the drip tape. The drip tape's very thin compared, and the scissors do a great job making a nice clean cut on that. The blue handle tool to the right of the scissors is essential. This is a hole punch. So in your systems, you're going to create places for your drip lines to connect. So you essentially are going to create holes in that main line where you want your drip tape to connect, or your drip emitters, or your half-inch drip line. And the way those work, let me get my cursor to cooperate again. This little guy right here, can you see this? This part is what connects the drip tape to the main line, and it has a barbed fitting at the top. And so this blue handle tool goes over your main line, punches a hole where you want it, and then you can easily insert that 1/4-inch barb and then connect your drip tape to that green part, and then that would go down the row that you want that water to go on. This is a coupler, so you can repair drip tape. You're going to have problems. There's going to be things that break. You're going to cut holes in your drip tape. It happens all the time when we're harvesting. Scissors, knives, if you're cutting lettuce, you're going to cut into it, and that's okay. You want to avoid that if you can and train people not to do that, but there's those couplers both on the main line and on the drip line that'll help fix that, okay? And a couple other things here. These little guys are called goof plugs. These will become your very best friend. So you want to buy like 100 of those at a time. Those are to fill holes. You made a mistake, you put a hole where you didn't want it, put a goof plug in it. That will stop the dripping out of that. And you can use it too to like control, like, well, I don't want my drip lines there anymore. I can just fill that hole with a goof plug and I stop that line. So the cool thing about these systems, they're very flexible. I really like to think of it like a cut and paste system where I am changing it every year depending on where I'm moving my system to. I can cut and paste, use the same parts and pieces. As long as I have enough things in inventory, I can make whatever I want work, okay? And the last thing there is a garden staple. This is really cool to be able to staple down that main line and keep it from moving, okay? Keeping it located where you want. That piece of orange twine on there, that helps me find it at the end of the season. Okay, so we're moving on. This is what the beginning of your system looks like. So this is an example of just a garden spigot. It could be a frost-free, it could be a spigot on your house. Okay, so that's the beginning piece. Now, the next thing that has to come after that, ideally, is a filter. And drip systems need to have filtration because you're dealing with moving water through very small openings. And if those openings get clogged, you're gonna not be able to move water through those. And the filter is the safeguard to keep particles from getting into those. Now, depending on what your water source is, this will determine what your filter will be. So most people that are on a well or city water, a screen filter like this is perfect. So the way this works is that inside this canister is a screen, and you can take that in and out and you can clean it. It's really easy to work with. And you can check that and inspect it to make sure if you are getting sediment, great, you can clean that. For folks that are going to be dealing with cisterns, ponds, streams, we want to recommend a disc filter. It's just a next kind of level of filtration for doing a better job on things like algae and bigger growth that might come through in your water. Okay, the next piece is this PCI regulator. This is what's going to control your pressure. So remember, out of this guy, you're probably going to be looking at 45 PSI on average. Most drip systems like to run at 12 PSI or lower. So that's a big jump. And if you don't put a regulator on there, you're liable to explode parts in your system. So the drip tape, the emitters are not meant to run at high pressure. And if you don't reduce pressure, what happens, and I've seen it, I've seen drip tape explode, I've seen things pop off. That's kind of the danger of that. So really important, and you choose that based on, again, what your pressure is and how big your system is. You can reduce pressure by adding more lines, and as your system grows, you'll see you can change that pressure just through, you know, how many parts and pieces you add on. Okay, next you have a start for your main line, and that's what you're gonna move your water to your garden and then connect your drip pieces to. The only other thing on this slide that I'll mention is that timer there. That would go before the filter. If you're gonna put a timer in, you essentially are gonna leave the water on all the time and use the timer to control whether that turns on and off. Great to have if you're going to be away on a trip, if you want more automation. The one thing I'll say is that if you're going to choose to put a timer on, you really got to make sure all your parts and pieces are connected well. You don't want things to come undone while you're not there. If that system fails while you're not there, it's just going to flow water. So that's the one danger with using timers and anything automated like that. Okay, now we're going to get into a little bit of design. So this first picture I want to show you is what I would typically kind of start to think about for a larger garden or even on our farm scale. This is kind of what it looks like. So you can see the starting part, and then that main line comes down, and right at the middle it tees. So that's where that T valve would be really handy, and you're creating two zones there. You can see zone 1, zone 2, and each of those zones are separated by valves. So this is a way that you can water certain areas at once and just one at a time. This is really handy if you have crops that have different watering needs. Maybe not everything needs to be watered the same every time. Also, if you're watering bigger areas, you can only water so much at a time at low pressure. So for us at Eggert, I can water 4 beds, 160 feet long, 16 lines at a time, and that's kind of it. So I have to subdivide my garden space into these different zones. So I may have up to 4 or 5 zones just in one field. I'll show you an example of that, but this is just to give you the idea, okay? All right, now this is some design work for trees and shrubs. The picture on the top left is a main line that's going to that 1/2-inch drip emitter tubing and then running along the ground parallel to a row of trees in our orchard. Okay, and that's primarily how I water my high density trees. Trees that are 3 foot or closer together work really well in this kind of system. I use drip emitter hoses with emitters every 2 feet, and I just run along there parallel to the trees and right up against the trees. So what happens is in this line, this is a 3/4 main line. It reduces, so there's a special adapter that reduces to that 1/2-inch line and then continues down. In this lower picture, this is a different way to do it. If you have your trees, they're farther spaced out, you could have a main line. It could be 1/2-inch, it could be 3/4. You make a hole here, or you have a T and then create a line. So this is one of the few instances that you can kind of create a circular layout with some of this tubing. Most of the drip tape really only likes to go in straight lines. Tubing tends to be more forgiving, and you can make that go, you know, in more curved layouts. So this is a nice way to be able to water a larger part of that root system. And then over here on the right side, this is an example of a micro sprinkler. And this sprinkler is watering our low density orchard at the Eggert farm. They're spaced every other tree, and they all come on at once, and they water about 14 feet in diameter. But this micro sprinkler is connected to a 3/4-inch main line, really just like this. It's underground. It's right below that white stand. And then there's a small 1/4-inch tube that comes to that 3/4 line, connects up through that white line, and then runs the water through that small sprinkler. The sprinkler is really low to the ground, has big particles. We're reducing evaporation. So if you're considering a sprinkler system, you know, think about these types of low to the ground, big droplet type sprinklers, and they work really well also for trees. Okay, and then the third system we want to talk about is container gardening. And I have containers at home. A lot of our herbs and flowers that my wife grows are in containers. I've designed these for some school gardens that I'll show you a picture of. But imagine you've built some sort of raised bed. Could be whatever, out of wood. It doesn't really matter. But the idea here is that, again, you have a main line that you're sourcing your water to the container. You've created a T here with that part that runs up the side of the container. Here's a valve and then an elbow. So there's all those parts that I just mentioned. And then that main line stops across the short end of the container. And then you can run whatever you want there. You could do 1/2-inch emitter tubing. You could do 1/4-inch. You could do drip tape. So you can choose and be creative on what you want to put in there. But that's the idea on using containers for this. Now here's some pictures. This is McDonald Elementary School in Moscow. My daughter went to this school, and I helped one of the teachers who really got excited about gardening. We helped build these raised bed gardens. Okay, so they had this, and they watered by hand for years, and you know, it's a lot of work. I mean, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 times 4. You know, there's probably 12 to 15 big raised beds here. That takes a long time to water by hand. So they wanted to automate. So what we did is got them a frost-free hydrant. That's what this is. And that means that this hydrant is frost protected. It can be pressurized in the winter, but not freeze. And what we did is right at the top there, we put on a Y valve. And that Y valve allowed us to do two things. It kind of created two zones, essentially. To the left is the system that's going to feed the containers, and the one to the right is just a hose. They still wanted to be able to water by hand if they needed to, but that system allows them to do that. So from that hose, the next piece is actually a timer. It's a battery operated timer. It's digital. They can go in and control that for whatever timing they want. Then there's the filter, the pressure regulator, and then it goes to 3/4 inch main line. Where does it go from there? Well, underground. The landscape crew did not want these lines to be on top of the sod, so we had to make little trenches for that line to go into, and that's why you don't see it even on the ground here. But we essentially brought those main lines up to a corner on that container, and just like I showed you in that last slide, we brought it up the side, made an elbow, and then ran it over across the short end of that bed, and then we used probably 4 or 5 1/4 inch drip tubings to make that work out. Okay, this is a picture of the Eggert farm. I just kind of wanted to give you a quick view of what this looks like. Much bigger than your garden scale, but I have water supply points here, here, here. So they're all scattered about the farm, and you can just kind of get an idea of how we subdivide. Okay, the orchard's on the left. So hopefully you'll have a chance to come see this in the summer, and we can walk around and get to look at some of these. And then finally, hoop house layout. This is those indoor high tunnels. So just again, an example of what this looks like inside. So this picture on the left, you can see this is actually from this fall. We were seeding spinach in those beds to the right, and every line of spinach gets a row of drip lines. So in our soils, the water just does not migrate horizontally enough to not have a line per row. So that's about as many rows as I would do in those sizes of beds. So four rows of spinach, every one of them has a drip line. My other option are these sprinklers. These are sprinklers that are connected to a main line. It's hard to see, but it runs the length of the house up in the superstructure on those beams, and then it hangs down and it operates exactly like I do my main line out in the field, but they're upside down, and those sprinklers will reach the entire width of the house, so I can water that entire house all at once. And that's how I water in the winter. I'm doing spinach, lettuce, mustard greens, carrots. All those crops do great with sprinklers in the wintertime. And then on the right, there's a picture of what this looks like. Again, my frost-free. Every hoop house has a water supply. There's a Y valve, a filter, pressure regulator, main line. This goes and connects to the line up in the top, and then down below on the ground you can see, well, I left my main line for the drip tape. It's disconnected now, but I'm going to come back and use that this summer. Okay. All right, we're getting close. Here's just some more pictures. I wanted to show you a couple more ideas on the cool things about drip tape. On the left, this is a picture of a couple of students that are laying out hoops over beds. You can see the drip systems running. We've transplanted, I think this is a kale crop, and that kale crop is planted in a weed barrier. It's a paper product. It could be plastic. That's very common in kind of larger scale gardens, but you can do this on a small scale too. But the idea here is that I'm putting that drip tape on top of that paper, and it's actually getting to the holes that I want it to go to. It will go through a paper product. If you're using plastic, it's got to go underneath. It won't go through that plastic. So there's some different ways that you can kind of use weed control integrated with your drip systems. Okay. Up on the top right hand, look at all that drip tape. This is what I do with it in the wintertime. I do reuse it, and I try to get 2 to 3 years out of my drip tape, and we have got miles of it. Believe me, this is where, you know, it's kind of a curse. Dealing with this in the wintertime, it takes extra time to get it out of the field, but we really like to hang it up and not bundle it. Some people like to roll it. Some people like to bundle it. I like to leave it go long. That way it doesn't get creases in it. The rodents can't get to it. It's off the ground. I can see it. So, you know, whatever you come up with, get creative, but you can do this. You can take it out. You can winterize your garden. You don't really have to even worry about the water being stuck in there. It's going to come out anyway. The main things to take apart in the wintertime are those filters, anything electronic, the pressure regulators. You got to disconnect all those and just bring them inside. It's really hard to get the water out of those. Bring those inside where they can be out of the cold for the winter, so you don't worry about freezing. It'll break them, believe me. I have done that. So, and then down in the bottom right-hand corner, just another picture of the hoop house. There's a lot going on in that picture. We actually have tables of starts in there. So we're running hoses. So again, like you can add valves to your system to have a hose and a drip line. You can do multiple things off of one point of connection. So I just wanted to show you how that looks. Okay. I think we made it. How are we doing, everybody? Yeah, 6:45. So I'm going to open it up to questions, and we're going to use our moderators tonight. Elizabeth's going to help kind of guide me through your questions, and we've got a good 15 minutes or so that we can spend hitting those. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. That was great. So many uses and applications. That's awesome. So yeah, as a reminder, you're welcome to put your questions into the chat and we will get to as many as we can with Brad here. First off, we had a question that came in with registrations. You touched on using raised beds, but someone was wondering about using containers, specifically like different pots scattered around. How would you build a drip irrigation system for that?
Okay, so, and I didn't show that in any of the pictures here, but the simplest way to do that would be to get one of the pieces, and when you get into DripWorks, there's special emitters that you can connect to the end of a 1/4 inch line. Okay, so that's the smallest delivery tubing that you can get, that 1/4 inch one. There are special emitters that have a barbed fitting that will connect to those. So the idea would be you can have main line maybe going to, say it's a patio, right? And you have multiple pots on your patio. You can have that main line go maybe next to your patio. And then from that, you would run a 1/4 inch line up to the top of your container and have one of those emitters actually delivering water to the top of that container. So imagine, there's so many different types of pots out there and different things you can use. That's a really easy way. Nurseries do that all the time to keep their watering a lot more automated. So if you go into DripWorks, you'll see what I'm talking about. Sometimes they're called bubblers, but they're a small emitter that will be rated to a certain number of gallons per hour. So, you can choose that and then put that into a system. So I think that's a great way to kind of solve that problem.
Wonderful, thank you. Another person asked, do you have any recommendations for a starter valve system that is expandable?
Yeah, well, essentially, I think we kind of went through the starter valve system. So you really want to kind of follow the guidelines that I outlined in there. So whatever your point of connection is, you at that very first connection, say it's your hose spigot, you can get different splitters, or what they called. And the examples that I showed were Y splitters. So just 2 options, but you can get ones that have 3 and even 4 valves on them. And I use those at home even. That actually is a really simple way. You can screw that right to your hose bib, and then right away you get 4 different options. So maybe you want to have a hose on one, maybe you want to go to different parts of your gardens with the other ones. So at that point, you can decide if you want to put a filter and a pressure regulator on each of those, or do you want to use those differently. So those kinds of parts are really readily available at hardware stores, and they're super easy to get. And you can get those online as well. One of the things that I'm just remembering that I didn't touch on, and I don't know if we have questions about this, but scheduling. So this is kind of a really key part, and I'm sure people might be curious, like, well, how long do I need to be doing these drip systems? And this, again, really depends on your soil type, but I'll use the Eggert farm as an example. We only water twice a week. So for all you folks, including myself, that have hand watered, we typically kind of think, well, I got to be doing this maybe every day, a little bit every day. But with the drip system, I'm running my drip on my vegetable crops for about an hour, 2 times a week. That's all it takes. And again, the goal there is to really spread out your watering events, do them for longer, and have water going deeper into that soil system so you can increase the rooting depth on whatever crop that is. That essentially is the key to reducing the amount of watering that you're going to do. So, check it out. Like if you go and you're hand watering and you go to your container and you start running water on the top of that container, you can just see it start to fill up and it pools, right? The water has nowhere to go. Think of it like a sponge. A dry sponge will move water laterally, but a wet, saturated sponge can't do that. Drip slows things down and it allows that water to slowly penetrate through your sponge, which is your soil, and go deeper, but it has to have time to do that. So that's what I do, about an hour, and I visually will always go out and check. I set a timer on my phone. I mean, I'm a little more old school about this. I don't have timers set up on my systems, but we all use a smartphone these days, and that timer feature on there, I use it all the time. I pick a cool ringtone, and that's my watering alarm. And I go back and I check, okay, is the water doing what I want it to do? Is it filled in the gaps on the surface? And I can have a chance to go check and see if it's going deep. Sometimes I got to let it go longer. Sometimes I'm good and I can turn it off and move on to my next watering event.
Awesome. Thank you. And we got a comment. Wow, that is really helpful information. So not sure if you can see the chat, but wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, cool.
We have another question. Is it possible to, build off of existing underground sprinklers for this system?
Yeah, there is, and I haven't done it, but check out, I can't remember, it's either the DripWorks or the Drip Depot guide. They have an adapter that connects to existing sprinkler systems and it literally converts that sprinkler to a drip adapter. So you can, I think it looks pretty cool. You can create that drip system off of those sprinklers. So check out that guide. There's a lot of information if you're interested in how like a cistern system works. They go over that, and I don't use that. I can't really speak to it, but they talk about, okay, you essentially can have like a rainwater catch system. You can develop that as an alternative. And again, it connects the same way. You can run those lines on top of the ground to your garden. So cisterns are also another cool option if you're looking at that.
Awesome. Thank you. Someone asked, if you have it trenched underground, do you have to blow pressure air through the line in fall, or does it need to be unburied during winter?
Okay, that's a great question. So the thing that depends on is the topography. If you have slope to your garden, and when I build on a slope, our gardens are designed so sometimes it doesn't go this way, but I try to go from high to low, right? So I try to have my supply lines at the high end and the end of my runs at the low end. So if I'm in that situation where I don't want to remove, or I've trenched lines, I do not have to remove those. You have to disconnect from your supply line, but if you can go to the end, like if anything, leave the very end open, and usually those end caps are just a hose fitting, you can unscrew that and just let the water out. That's the easiest way to do that. If you don't have that kind of gravity assist for you, then totally, you should blow it out. But these systems, they're all really flexible plastic. They tend not to break with water in them. They kind of all leak a little bit. They're not like super watertight like a glued system. So I usually don't see real problems develop from overwintering. The other thing I will mention, because this topic is important, likewise in the spring, when you're reconnecting those lines, if they've been disconnected, they've been on the ground, right? So things are going to happen. Dirt's going to get them. Maybe insects are going to get in there. You want to open the ends of all your lines and let water flow through those so you can eliminate particles from building up in those lines. So that's the other time that I would really consider blowing out or adding water to those lines to clean them, the beginning of the season. Really important.
Good to know. Thank you. Someone asked, do you increase your watering times at all during hotter periods of the year?
I rarely do. I mean, our Palouse soils are fantastic. That silty loam holds water. I am still amazed. I've been doing it here almost 20 years, and I really love our soils. I mean, that's why we can dryland farm. That's why the Palouse is famous for dryland farming, is because our soils hold moisture so well for those dryland grain crops. So, I mean, I've got farmers that are doing vegetables dryland or very minimal watering. So I really try not to overwater, even in the heat. If I'm coming to a dry area where I'm reintroducing, maybe I flipped a bed or I'm starting something in the middle of a summer, I've got a succession of lettuces. Yeah, maybe it's going to take a little bit more watering to get that back started into irrigation. I might have to add another watering event, go from maybe 2 to 3 a week just to double check. So that's not unreasonable to do during the heat, for sure.
Sounds good. Someone asked, how do you know which plants to put together for the proper amount of water needed? And they're asking specifically about raised beds, but.
Okay. Well, the easiest way I can describe this is I really like to try to group crops that are managed similarly. So my direct seeded crops, my carrots, my beets, those are all usually together. One of those earlier pictures I showed, those crops tend to all kind of follow the same kind of watering schedule. I separate all my squashes, I separate my potatoes, I separate my onions. That's really tough to do in a container garden. You might want to be watering a lot of different things in the same space. Totally okay. Like don't be afraid to do that. Like experiment. You know, the more you add to a container, it's going to be complicated, and that's okay. Don't sweat it though. Like I think you just kind of have to find the common denominator where you're watering everything enough that they're getting good root systems. Like make that your goal.
Perfect. Thank you. What is your average flow rate?
Well, so this depends. At WSU, like I mentioned, we have not that we have an abundance of water, we have a system that delivers abundance of water. We're using deep aquifer wells. They have large pumps, they have large holding tanks, and so our flow rates, I know our pressure tends to be around 65 to 70, and our flow rates will vary around the farm depending on where I'm at. And I don't know what those numbers are off the top of my head, but go look at those guides that I showed you, and they have an easy way to calculate that. You essentially, you know, fill a 5-gallon bucket over a certain amount of time, and you just time that. How long does it take to fill 5 gallons, 10 gallons? You can get that number really easily for your own system, and then look at that guide, and it'll kind of walk you through what those numbers mean for your system. Don't let it stop you or hold you back. I mean, it's going to just give you an idea. You really just got to make some decisions, get some parts and pieces, and start doing this. And like I've mentioned, it's really a creative work. You're going to realize, okay, if I'm not getting water to all my emitters, I need to change the system. I essentially need to make more zones, right? So if your flow's low or your pressure's low, you got to do smaller zones. And that's the only way that you're going to get water to all those emitters, okay?
Great, thank you. Someone asked, do you have a preference of drip tape versus soaker line, and would that depend on your soil or your crop?
I will always choose the drip line over the soaker lines for vegetable row crops. So that really is my preference. The emitter lines, which are kind of similar to a soaker hose, but they're the plastic ones that'll only have a hole like every 6 inches, 8 inches. I like those for container gardenings, and I really like them for trees and shrubs.
Great, thank you. And someone was wondering where they can get soil for raised beds, and does WSU sell soil or compost?
WSU does not sell soil in the Pullman area. SYG Nursery does carry not potting soil. They carry soil like bulk soil that you're talking about you could use for container gardening. They also sell compost from WSU. You can't buy compost from WSU unless you buy it in really big volumes, dump truck size volumes. So SYG carries it, Pullman Building Supply, Moscow Building Supply, those places all carry WSU compost. And there are other places that do carry soil, but SYG is a good place to start.
Great. Thank you for sharing those sources. And we have time for one more question. So how important or what are the advantages of growing crops in boxes rather than the ground, since you said you do both?
Yeah. Well, one of the great things, like I started doing this at home, it's kind of a way to do two things at once. It's sort of, we like the aesthetic of the raised bed, so we just kind of like the way it looks, and we can kind of focus certain crops into certain boxes. So it's kind of focused, I guess, our efforts into growing, those boxes, and they're easier to weed, honestly. You can just mow right around them. I can convert my lawn to boxes like instantly. I can just put a box literally on my lawn. I can put weed fabric down and fill it with whatever soil. I can buy bag soil, I can buy purchased soil. You can put whatever works for you in there. So it's such an easy way to create a garden space, especially though in your lawn. It's just a cool way to do it, and it's kind of up off the ground. It's easy to maintain. So I like that aesthetic for kind of around our house.
Perfect. Thank you. That sounds great. All right. I think that is about all the time for questions we have this evening. But thank you, Brad, for your presentation. This was absolutely very informative, and I suspect there'll be a lot of experimentation going on this spring and summer.
Yeah, all right. Well, I hope everybody's inspired, and good luck with gardening this year, and try something new with your irrigation system.